Hey, everybody. I'm really excited about today's podcast because we're talking to someone who can help us really understand um, that we can think differently about work, and we can think about work in a way where it's good for the workplace, good for our lives outside of work. And this is based on years and years of research and study. And so I would argue we are never going back to a monolithic approach to work. The future will always bring a diversity of workplaces where we're doing work in a diversity of ways. And that's just the way things are. So, who's going to help us do this? First, I'd like to introduce David Blustein. He's been instrumental in developing theories and concepts that represent an inclusive and social justice informed perspective on the role of work in our lives. So, welcome, David. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. And you'll see after I talk to David, everything we talk about, I'm going to illustrate with two amazing leaders who've put these ideas into practice.
Mm.
So stay tuned for both our conversation with David, but also two leaders who've really shown us that when you integrate your care responsibilities and work responsibilities, it's good for you, good for your workplace, good for your family. All right. So one of the things ThirdPath has been talking about forever is the idea that if we're going to find flexible solutions that are really good for the worker and the workplace, you need to think about first the actual work that's being done. And so that is always criteria number one. And some jobs can be done remotely, and some jobs can't be done remotely. That's just the truth of it. But what you and I talked about is it's also influenced by the life stage. And so you might start your career where you approach it one way, and then along comes children, perhaps, and then
Mhm.
you want to make a change in how you approach it. And then what I learned is along comes elder care. And
Right.
again, it requires
Yes.
some change. So it's the job, it's the life stage, but there's also some personal preference. Some people might really like to work on site, and they're not going to be a good match for somebody's workplace where it's primarily hybrid or remote. And so you have to get to know yourself and think about how do I work best? And last but not least, it's the boss, meaning
Mhm.
who's above you, who's managing you, and who's managing them. And what are the messages that are coming down from above around what's the right way to work? We're going to get to that one next. But let's first talk about those first three. What have you learned around, if we think big about all kinds of jobs, what have you learned around how the kind of work people are doing or the life stage they're in influences how they'll approach their work?
I think these are huge factors, and I appreciate you framing them the way you've done because, first off, the life stage makes a tremendous difference. One of the things that am aware of, both in my personal life as well as in my research, as well as my practice, is that there are certain points in our lives where we are really, really taxed. I kind of think about the 30s and 40s as a period where if you've decided to have children, that's when the workload is the most intense. And in developing a career, that's often the time when your workload is most intense. You need to prove yourself. You need to really make your mark in whatever field you're in. So that particular life stage is really hard. And just as a brief recommendation for folks, I've usually advised people to kind of think about the long game, and particularly in primarily in their careers, because you can't really think about the long game when you're taking care of kids or when you're taking care of your elderly parents or disabled family members. So I think the developmental stage is really, really important. Um, and then the second piece you mentioned was the nature of the work, which is really, really critical. I mean, in large measure due to the pandemic, we have introduced diverse ways of working, which were kind of beginning to happen. They were kind of starting to burgeon before the pandemic, but now we see much more diversity with some organizations, as you've mentioned, preferring remote work. Some organizations want to downsize on their cost of having to maintain offices. But there's a lot of variability here as well. And I think, as we talked about the first time I met you, there's also individual differences in how people approach work. Some people have a much greater need for affiliation, a greater need for social contact, and other people are comfortable working at home. and or need to take care of some things at home, like, manage their kids coming and going, and being able to kind of have a integrated life, not just broadly, but, minute to minute, hour to hour. So those are very, very important considerations. Um, so I think
Wonderful.
there's a lot of variability both in the context of work, and there's also a variability inside of us psychologically in terms of what we aspire to and what we're comfortable with.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes, you're absolutely right. There really is this variability that's going to be happening. And I'll just push back a little bit about the idea of building connection at work,
Mhm.
because what I've really learned is, and this comes to the boss idea. If you are a person who's moved ahead in your career, but you've really leaned into hybrid and remote work as part of the way to make that long view work on your
Yes.
career, as you've managed, the different stages of childhood that you're caring for in your family. Um, when professionals have had that long view approach to their careers and they've kind of leaned into hybrid and remote work, what we've seen is they've gotten really good at building connection very intentionally, building their networks very intentionally, and so that they would probably say to you, you know what, I don't have to be physically present to really have a strong relationship with people. In
Right.
fact, my workforce is distributed. I don't even have everybody in the same office. So I can't even count on knowing
Mm.
the right people at work anymore. I have to think to myself, how am I building that network? How am I building those relationships wherever people work?
Yeah.
And that's where I want to get to that boss factor. One of the things we've really seen at ThirdPath is people like those who've moved ahead following this integrated approach to their careers. They are now the ones who are staying committed to hybrid and remote work going
Mm.
forward. And I think the leaders who really only experienced work as work or care, and probably somebody else did the care, they're the ones who are a little bit more skeptical about how hybrid and remote work works, in part because of what you just said. They built relationships face to face in the office and counted on that regular
Mhm.
on-site time to build those relationships, to get to know what people were working on. That's how they worked. They worked
Yeah.
by, it used to be like managed by walking around, and so I think there's this interesting divide between bosses who've had experience around hybrid and remote work and their openness and commitment to it, and bosses who had less experience and their worries about
Mhm.
hybrid and remote work. Are you seeing any of that, and what's your reaction to that?
I think it's really hard to come up with generalizations that will work for everyone. We live in a very diverse world, and people are very different, and organizations are very different. I do think the boss is, in some ways, one of the most important links in creating flexibility in how we approach work. If the boss believes in the idea that people can be productive and creative and relationally connected to their coworkers via hybrid or remote work, then I think it's going to happen. And I do believe that the expectations of the organization will really frame how people approach it. So I think that when an organization not just allows flexibility, but fosters flexibility, that can make a really big difference.
Yeah.
Um, that said, I just want to bring up one point about the in-person work, which is something I've learned from reading occupational sociology and the whole area of weak ties. I don't know if you've heard about this concept, but
Yep.
it's based on the idea that these little conversations we have during the day provide a lot of relational support for us. So I guess my thought is to make sure that when we're doing hybrid and remote work, that we allow for opportunities for those weak ties. And it doesn't mean that you're going to go to a CVS and just start talking to strangers. Um, but that when you do have to go out and, do your chores or run errands, that if you see the same dry cleaner, like in my neighborhood, my wife was impressed that my dry cleaner knows my name. And I don't even go that often. I was impressed too. But things like that are like they're little sources of relational support and connection that are meaningful. So I think the idea of approaching the workplace in a flexible way means we also approach our relationship life in a flexible way.
Oh my gosh, you're just leading us right into the powerful work that you taught me about Mary Sue Richardson
Yes.
and how she said, and she's done research on the idea that we were really very narrow in our understanding about careers. And she said,
Mhm.
you need to really approach it in more of a whole person approach, where you, to understand a person's career story, you need to sure understand their paid work, but you also need to understand that they are probably in charge of care, either for
Yes.
themselves or others. And you also then need to understand those relationships that they need to foster around that care work and the relationships you need to foster at work. And so you're helping us, expand this thinking that in an integrated life, you need to become very intentional. And I think that's what I see in a third path community. People have become very intentional. I want to do my work well. I want to do care well. I want to build relationships at home or in my community well. And I want to build relationships at work well. And they've been putting Mary Sue Richardson's ideas into practice. Tell us more about why this was important to you when you learned or you've been working with Mary Sue Richardson.
Well, I will say that Mary Sue Richardson is a very, very valued colleague and friend, and I've known her for over 40 years. Um, she wrote an article in 1993 about the importance of work in people's lives, and particularly critiquing this idea of focusing on career and not work more broadly. But in that 1993 article, she also talked about the importance of care work. The reality is we have a lot of commitments to care work, and sometimes people, when I talk about this, they'll kind of feel like, oh my God, it's a burden. I have to take care of, people when they're ill. Um, but in reality, as we look at, developmental research data over time, people who make space for care work and who don't rush through it, but really are present in their care work are going to have more fulfilled lives. So there's a lot to be said for how Mary Sue Richardson describes both paid care work, which is the work that we hire people to do, as well as the unpaid care work that we all do. So there's a number of things about Mary Sue's work which I think are important. One is she certainly identified, as the Third Path does, the gendered nature of care work. So when you talk about care work, we do need to talk about the way in which expectations vary by gender. I'm seeing that start to dissipate a bit, and I'm sure you folks are as well in your institute, but I think it's got a long way to go. Often when you see men doing care work, they'll kind of rave about it and take a lot of credit for it, but a lot of times women just do it and they don't need to be validated or um, so I think the reality of our lives is that marketplace work and care work, which is how Mary Sue Richardson has kind of defined these domains, are really critical aspects of life. And I just will add one more point. I've been doing a lot of work on the concept of decent work, which was sponsored by the International Labor Organization. And in working on a recent paper on a neoliberal critique of decent work, we came across some really important innovations that the ILO is doing in terms of really promoting unpaid care work, personal care work as a critical part of decent work. And they just started this last year with a resolution to start to really put this into practice. I was really pleased to see that. Uh,
Yeah, that's
so,
great. And in fact, it brings me to what you've done in your career, which is look at work broadly for
mhm,
all different kinds of industries, whether that's hourly wage or professional. And I want to get back to that because I think there's something around this different types of work that influence people's behaviors. And so I want to start on the professional side because you've mentioned how gender plays in, right?
mhm.
Well, gender plays in at work and at home, right? Because there's these expectations of what a good leader looks like. A good leader puts work first.
Yes,
And so what happens at the workplace is we have these two very conflicting assumptions. Good leaders look like this, caregivers look like this. And what the third path community has been doing is saying, nope, good leaders have integrated lives, and men and women, in fact, all genders, can move ahead in an integrated career.
yes,
And then what's so fun about the third path community is honestly, David, what I've seen is one way these professionals have pushed back, and we're going to see this in the two stories that I'm about to share with these two professionals, is to really think differently at home around gender, not just at work around gender. So there is, but what it does mean is change is slow. We're asking people to think very differently about leadership careers. We're asking people to think very differently about care work and who does it. And change is slow. It's very slow. But I'm glad to hear you're seeing that across the board, there's more conversation about making room for care work. Any
Yeah.
more thoughts you want to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ILO resolution meant a lot. It's a big organization. It's a subsidiary. It's an affiliate of the United Nations. So I think that that really says something about the global community and the community that is really focusing on work, from a macro level public policy point of view. I think that I think care work has always been a popular issue particularly among women who have faced the big burden of it. And I think right now, discussions about care work need to move beyond gender. We need to really work particularly hard in helping men to realize this is part of their lives and it's part of their responsibility, but it's also a way to increase the sense of purpose and meaning of their lives. It's both.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to just promote it as a way to establish purpose and meaning. We do have obligations. And I really was moved by your discussion in what I've read about you, been taking care of your elderly parents. um, I think about my parents a lot. They passed away in 2008, and I devoted a lot of time to their care in the last years of their lives. And I think that as I reflected back upon my life, those were some of the most meaningful experiences I've had.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, it's no surprise that you were creating time for that too, David, because you told me a little bit about your story and your parents and how your dad was kind of this traditional dad who had, I think was a Marine maybe even.
he
And
was a Marine in World War II. He worked as a sheet metal mechanic at Pan Am. He would go to lunch with his metal lunch bucket. Yeah, he was a kind of traditional blue collar worker, but in some ways he was not traditional at all. So when my mom went to work, she worked in a department store in Queens, where we lived, Queens, New York, and my dad worked at JFK Airport. So he would get home earlier, and over time, actually, quite quickly, he learned how to cook some meals. And I would come home from school or from, you know, being out and about with my friends and see my father wearing an apron, making an entire meal, from scratch.
yeah,
And it was really integral part of my growing up to see how much my father was involved in care work. He did laundry. And I think I mentioned to you when we first talked that he was very, very devoted to my mother. And he felt his whole life that his life was kind of made by marrying my mother. He felt like he was so honored that he was able to marry a person of that. My mother had so much dignity, so much class, and he admired her. There was a sense of intense admiration, and he'd never once complained about doing any of this work.
Yeah, so during a generation when that was just not the norm, you
Right.
were already seeing how you could really do things differently at home.
Yes.
And your career has now been to show how things can be differently done at work. So when we think back about what we've been talking about today, the future of work is going to be diverse. People need to understand leaders, employees, given the job I have, this is the kind of flexibility I can, access,
Hmm.
and they need to understand what I need might change over the life course. And hopefully, when they practice these ideas, they will become team leaders and organizational leaders who make this possible for flexibility in the smart way, a strategic way for everybody. What else would you like to add as a last thought about all this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, one of my last thoughts is, and I think you've known my work somewhat, that I have devoted much of my life to focusing on working people who are on the margins, blue collar workers, workers who are precarious, underemployed people, people who have struggled with unemployment, people who are working and in poverty, which is one of the reasons why while I come from the field of career development, I've developed a sub-discipline called psychology of working, because I really want to dignify the work experiences of everyone. So I guess I just want to put in a good word that everybody is struggling with this, and that people who are in jobs that are less secure often have developed ways of integrating work and care because they may be home more, they may be working different shifts. I mean, people from all genders may be doing much more flexible work. And I think there's a lot we can learn from observing the way that they approach both work and care, because I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of innovative things that people have developed as part of their survival mechanisms.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of a book Francine Deutsch wrote way back when I started Third Path called Having, like cutting in half, having it all. And she really illustrated how hourly wage workers were kind of putting in practice some of the ideas that Third Path talks
Yes,
about way before professional workers, in part because they weren't. I think professional workers are facing that other problem of who's going to advance in their career. So they have this, weird dilemma there. But it's a really good takeaway is that let's see this as an everybody opportunity,
yes,
not just for some people. So
absolutely.
thank you for your words of wisdom. Thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you and your organization for the important advocacy work you are doing. It's really making a difference.
Wonderful. Okay, I told you guys that I was going to have two amazing leaders from industries that were really not very creative around flexibility or certainly remote work prior to the pandemic. But now, because of the pandemic, have really been able to do things so radically differently. I'm really glad to have Cindy Kanisher, Executive Director of PACE Women's Justice Center, here with us today. Not only is this an example of how law and legal services are being provided differently post-pandemic, it's around services that are so important they couldn't be put on hold during the pandemic. And in some ways, I think because of that realization that we had to keep on providing services, yet had to do it differently, real innovation happened. And that's an important message today. When there's a desire to think differently, often we can really create some good answers around this stuff. So, Cindy, tell us a little about the work that the Pace Women's Justice Center does and how things changed over the pandemic. And then we're going to hear a little bit about how your life built up to this.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about the Pace Women Justice Center. So as you said, Jessica, we provide free civil legal services for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and elder abuse. We are a staff of 34 right now. And, prior to COVID, all of our work was in person. We are lawyers. There are 26 lawyers and then other supporting staff. And, the idea or the thinking is if you're a lawyer, you're providing legal services, you need to meet with people in person. That was just the way it was done. And in fact, our whole model that prior to COVID, we had opened a new walk-in legal clinic for in-person services. And it was great. It was really great. And so that's how we were working. And then COVID hit. And, in a day, basically, everything shut down. And because of the services that we provide, some of which are emergency services, for example, people who need orders of protection, people who are dealing with custody arrangements for children, when everything shut down, nobody had access to the courts, to legal services, to their lawyer. They couldn't walk into our office anymore and get any legal information, understand their legal rights. And so we literally had to pivot in a day. And at the same time, the courts were pivoting because in New York State, they weren't set up either for remote work. And so very quickly, we figured out how to set up a system, a computer system, do interviews, and get everybody computers at home, have home offices. And really the driving force was that we knew that our clients needed legal help. That, just because everything had shut down, domestic violence was still happening, and people needed to get into court. There were stories where we were hearing from clients that, their abuser had custody of the children for the weekend, and then when everything shut down, they weren't bringing the children back, and safety issues. People, had to leave home because of the abuse, and they didn't know how to get into court and get an order of protection. So we needed to do things very, very quickly. And I do have an amazing team here at the Women's Justice Center, and we did it. We figured.
Yeah. And I think what's amazing in your story is, and there's so many details we could provide, in a sense, what happened was something better for the clients. Because instead of having to take a whole day to do something that was really critical, there really was a way for them to now connect through Zoom in a very safe situation. And you also told me that there is more efficiency in the ability to handle this. Now, you've gone back to having some people who be able to do walk-in, and that's still offered, but you now have kind of this more range of services available that it looks like it's actually in a better situation for the people who work for you and the people who need your services. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly right.
Hmm.
Since COVID, and since, everybody, started to get back coming into the office and the courts opened again, we really, what we have found and what we are doing now is we provide services both in person and remotely, and we give people the option. And what we're finding, particularly, for example, in our walk-in legal clinic, which, as I said, had been all in person, now we give people the option. You can walk in if you want, but you can make an appointment, and we can do things remotely. And it's most people are choosing remotely now because it's really an access, an access to justice issue. It makes it so much easier for them to hop on a Zoom call, meet with a lawyer. Maybe they can do it from home, or they can do it during their lunch hour. We've had people do it from their car, as long as it's safe and, confidential. And we've seen an increase in the ability to provide services through our legal clinic. For example, we can provide 20% more services by offering this remote access.
Yeah.
And, the courts are still allowing it, not quite as much, but they also learned and understood that, particularly, for in family court, that, for someone to have to take a day off, a full day off to come to work when they just need to be present for a hearing, or even a court, um, not necessarily a hearing, but just, for a half an hour to be in court, and they can do it easily remotely. It makes it so much better for people.
Yeah,
So
you said it all. And just for those who are listening in, think about that. Access to justice has increased because we now have hybrid and remote work. Because our big message today is hybrid and remote work are not going anywhere. They're here to stay. We just need to get smarter and smarter about how to do this. So stay tuned. I want to tell you one more amazing story to help us remember hybrid and remote are here to stay, and they're improving how we work and how we take care of ourselves. Hi, I told you I had another great story to share. This is Liz Ruley. She's the Associate Director of Research at Helix Inc. And what I want to focus on with Liz is another part of this important concept that hybrid and remote work is here to stay. She's from the science industry, and having my father a researcher as well. Liz and I were talking about how the old school approach to research was you were kind of at your lab 12 hours a day, maybe 6 days a week. And it really was this very work first approach to science careers. Now, Liz is somebody who wanted to do a great job at work. She loved doing the research she was doing, but she also really was committed to her life outside of work. And so she really made some decisions around how to think differently about how to do a great job at work and have time for her life outside of work. And part of it was finding the right workplace, and a workplace that finally had realized, hey, science work can be done in a way where it includes hybrid work and it doesn't require 6 hours, 12-hour days, 6 days a week. So Liz, Tell us a little, we're going to talk a little bit about the job, the life stage, the person, and how all those things, you doing your job differently, you at different life stages evolving how you approach things, you, a person who wanted to have work and life be important to you, how that helped you become a different kind of boss today, too. So tell us a little bit about the research industry and your career in it and what's changed there.
Hmm. So, I guess going back to when I was training in science, at first when I started out, I was actually in the lab. And so, yeah, when you are doing work in the lab, you do need to physically be there and you can't really escape that. And yeah, the hours are pretty long when you're in your training stage. I guess two things happened during my training. One was I realized, okay, I'm willing to put in this time now, but when I'm done training, I want to work a reasonable work week. I don't want this to be my whole life. Even though I really love doing the research, I wanted to be able to do other things and not be, burned out from having way too much time spent working. The other thing was during my training, I evolved more and more into doing computational work where I wasn't actually in the lab. And so a kind of nice thing about even the lab I worked in then was that since I was doing computational work, I could do it outside of the lab. And so there wasn't a strict, you must be here at certain hours. Type of policy, and so I would actually do a lot of my work from home, even back when I was training. One downside of that was because there was also this requirement that you do a lot of work and put in a lot of hours. I would get kind of scary work emails like in the middle of the night sometimes, like, oh my God, you need to do this thing. You know, I would set up a policy of like, maybe I just shouldn't check my email right before I go to bed because I would get stressed out about the things that needed to happen. So it was kind of you can work remotely, but also you need to work all the time kind of thing. And that was not great. So I got married, we had our first kid, and then it, of course, became extremely important for me to make sure I had enough time with family. So I utilized being able to have flexible work hours then by not doing an 8-hour day at the office, but doing a 5-hour day, actually formally a 5-hour day at the office, and then doing an extra 3 hours at night after our kid would go to bed. And kind of really sticking to that schedule and being able to work, remotely and in the office at that time. So that was kind of a system that I set up to make sure that I did have time at home and not just doing work all the time. And that was back when I was in academia. I was a professor for 5 years at Duke University, and just really enjoying the work, but also making sure I carved out that family time. And then I transitioned to industry 8 years ago now. I really wanted to be able to have access to lots of interesting data and get to do really cool analyses because I get really excited about that without having to worry about the professor life of needing to write grants all the time and worry about where the next funding is going to come from and everything. So that's why I made the switch. The first company I worked for in industry did have a in-office presence kind of culture where nobody worked outside of the office really. It was you worked while you were there. Everyone expected to see you for having FaceTime with each other and everything. And actually there was a pretty good office culture there, honestly. People would get together and eat lunch together and everything. So it was nice actually. But yeah, you really only worked in the office. You didn't do anything outside the office. But the place I wound up working after that is Helix, where I am now. And we sequence people's DNA to use as part of their healthcare. And the specific role that I play in the company is to do research on the data that we have to try to make more genetic discoveries and figure out different ways that we can use genetic information to help people's healthcare. When I first started there, we have two main offices. One is up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the other is down in San Diego. The lab is in San Diego, where all the sequencing is done, and most of the other work took place up in the Bay Area. Me doing computational work and doing research, I didn't need to be in the lab. I would work more closely with the people who are up in the Bay Area, but I lived in San Diego. So it was a little bit tricky when I first was hired because they expected me to be up in the San Francisco area because that's where my coworkers would be. But we didn't want to move. And we did kind of realize and come to the conclusion that, like, oh, actually everything I do is computational. I don't actually need to physically be there. It's okay. So the way it worked out at first was I would go into the lab down here, even though those weren't the people I was directly working with, but I would still be, on site. So I would be in the lab here. We did say it was okay for me to have 1 day a week when I was remote, so I would stay home and work one day a week, which was nice. But then I would also fly up to the Bay Area once a month to have FaceTime with my colleagues up there. So that was the arrangement before COVID. So a little bit of hybrid, but mostly expected to be in person. And as soon as COVID hit, everyone who didn't need to physically be in the lab stayed home. The company actually transitioned to doing COVID testing for a while. So the lab stayed open and the people who worked in the lab kept going in and handling all the COVID testing. But the rest of us, we worked from home, and we worked from home for a very long time. The office didn't reopen for a very, very long time. And after it did reopen, the policy stayed that everyone is okay to keep working from home. You only come in if you need to or if you want to. And so that's the way it has stayed over time.
Wow.
So we have
Such a great,
yeah.
such a good story. And it really, Liz, it illustrates so many of the things that we're talking about today. First, if we just go backwards from the end of your story to the beginning, so yes, there are some jobs that are still going to require people to be physically present. It doesn't mean there isn't some flexibility in those jobs, so there could be that the person who's doing those COVID tests during COVID could flex when they came into the lab, or maybe they could work reduced hours and not do it the whole time. Like, there's ways because their job was more interchangeable, they had flexibility in a different way. And so just because someone has a job that requires them to be on site doesn't mean they can get some flexibility. But what your story also tells is how things change over the life stage, right? And you were kind of thinking ahead. You were saying to yourself, you know what? I have a whole life. It's going to keep on evolving. And I really heard you talk about it's not just where I work, it's how much I work.
Mm.
And so you were paying attention to that a long time ago and saying, how am I making choices today to make sure tomorrow I can keep on moving ahead in my career, but doing it in a way where I don't burn out and I have time for other life responsibilities. So you were thinking in advance about your life stage, which brings us to the third factor, the person. What we can see in Liz's story is someone who really was proactive, who really knew I'm great at the work I do, and I can keep on pushing the boundary a little bit and asking for something slightly differently because I know it's not compromising the work. And voila, you ended up at a workplace that now is really supportive of all these things. In fact, when I was talking to you about your workplace, I was quite impressed with how they are really thinking smart about how to build connection at the workplace, how to bring in a new person and help them feel connected to that workplace. So you are now part of a workplace that is the future of work, and you were a person who was thinking in this future way a long time ago. What I want to get to next is both Liz and Cindy are now managers of other people. And I think those life stories has helped them become a better manager. So let's get Cindy back on camera too. All right. So what ThirdPath has been teaching all along is that, life is work and care. And I think what you're going to hear from Cindy and Liz's story is that their commitment to doing a great job at work, but also caring well for their families, helped them create careers that were more integrated. And that it's back to that thing I was talking to David about. Paid work is only one element of our whole stories. So is taking care of ourselves or our loved ones. So is building strong relationships at home around those people we love, and building strong relationships at work. And when we think about work in that more holistic way, we start seeing how a life well lived in either dimension, work or care, helps the other dimensions get stronger too. So Cindy, earlier in your career, you were trying to say, how do I do work in a way where I really have time and energy for my life? And it took you to the work you do today. What's the 1 minute story about how that all evolved, or the 2 minute story?
Oh, sure. So I was working as a lawyer in the prosecutor's office in Manhattan, and I had 2 kids at the time and long commute, and I decided that, I wanted more time with the family. And I wanted to work part-time. And at the time, I think the office had like 500 lawyers in it. There was one part-time position that was available. And I applied for it and I didn't get it. And I then realized that I needed to look for something else. And I wanted to always keep working because I really loved the work that I was doing and, you know, committed to doing this work. And so I, you know, very quick story is I met someone as I was dropping my child off to go to preschool. They were looking for a part-time position for somebody who could do exactly what I wanted to do. And so I really kind of fell into this part-time position 2 days a week. And that was 26 years ago at the Pace Women's Justice Center. And you know, I was the third attorney. And as I said, now we have 34 attorneys, 34 staff, 26 attorney. I've stayed with the center over these years because it really allowed me to have that perfect balance of working in a field and doing work that I really, truly loved, and also having time to be home with my children. So I started 2 days a week, and when it felt right and when I could, I went up to 3 days a week, and ultimately 4 days a week, and then, you know, ultimately 5 days a week. And there were bumps in the road. I remember there was one time where I went up to 4 days a week and I realized I wasn't ready to do that. And so I was able to go back down. And I do think that the experience, my own personal experience of, you know, being able to do that and be able to balance everything has helped me and really informed the way I think about how I want, as a leader of the Pace Women's Justice Center now for the past 10 years, how I think about what it should be for the staff here at the center.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, it pays off in so many ways. The people who work at the Pace Women's Justice Center, they love it here and they stay for a long period of time. They don't leave. We have people who've been working here. I'm here 26 years, but you know, people stay here for 10, 15 years because they can.
Yeah, in fact, you're going to hear in Liz's story a similar pattern there. So you are 100% right, Cindy. That personal experience you had has shaped you to be a better leader today, and retention is a direct outcome from you being a better leader. That's really great. You said something else that's really interesting. Law was a pretty tough field to try to do an integrated approach in forever. And so it's not just where and when you work, but how much you work. And so you were listening to Cindy's story. One reduced hour position existed, period, at this big law firm. And even that one was probably dinged a little if you ended up with that part-time job. So there's this whole kind of industry norms around what's acceptable. And so what you've also done, Cindy, is you've gone into a different area of work where you can be much more creative in thinking about how this stuff. Hopefully law is making some changes around how much people work, but maybe not. We'll see. But they're certainly making some changes around where people can work, which is a progress. I want to get to Liz's because that same challenge happens. Liz, you were talking about academia. I actually argue academia is one of the tougher places to have an integrated life. And everybody says, wait, you can work anywhere. You have a lot of flexibility about when you work. But in the prestigious academic institutions, the amount of work that's expected of you is enormous and constant. And so you made a decision too of saying, hey, is there a way to take my passion and still be that incredibly smart person and make a difference doing the same work in a way that lets me to live a life? So your story also includes pushing back at some industry norms. There's one other part of your story, Liz, that I think is fun here. You knew you still would have a job that was demanding, not as demanding, and you and your partner both wanted to have a parent involved with your kids. So you didn't just think differently at work. You also thought differently at home. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah. So I guess when we had actually, when we were about to have our first kid, we realized it was really important to us to have one of the parents stay home with the kid. And I don't think we had really planned that out beforehand or, decided exactly what would happen. But, it became very clear at that time that the perfect candidate for it was my husband, who's fantastic with kids and really patient, and has always been really good with babies. So yeah, it made a clear sense that he would be the one to stay home. So that was the decision that we made, was that he would become a stay-at-home dad. And so he was a stay-at-home dad for many years. Now he's working part-time. But yeah, that was what made things better for us, and also didn't make me worry about whether or not I was, abandoning my kids, or whether they were old enough to be in daycare and that sort of thing. It was really a relief to have that.
Well, what you see in both of their stories is care is kind of a family systems solution. So even a single parent, one of the things that we do at ThirdPath is encourage a single parent to think about who can they bring into their network in addition to paid childcare. That's that go-to person to help out for the unexpected, because we can't plan exactly how care is going to work, and we need caregivers to be able to step in for the unpredictable. And so I think what I heard in both Cindy's and Liz's story is, they expanded the thinking to say work can be done differently, and as a family system, how do we want to solve this? And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about next, because one of the things that David Blustein talked about as a career researcher is how gendered this becomes, right? But what I said to David was, it's not gendered just because of care work, it's gendered because of career norms. And so what you guys are doing is pushing against the assumptions of what makes a good leader. All right, so what I really want both Cindy and Liz to think about for a second is how being a parent and those experiences you had made you a better leader today. So Cindy, any insights about that?
The idea that I wanted to be the best parent I could be and spend, the time with my family and my children and be there for them, but also, work in the field and feel sort of fulfilled from that work. I think that I took that, and being able to do it, and then, bringing that into the office. And when I think about, um, sort of the way that I want to give the opportunity for people at my office to have that same opportunity, because I knew how important it was to me. And, I felt like, my children seeing me feeling fulfilled and being able to go to work and talking about my work with them, and then also spending time with them. Um, it really was so important to me. And so, as I wanted to make sure that for those who wanted that in the office, they had that opportunity too.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I guess
that's great.
that's the way that I would answer that question.
Yes, and I don't think I'm going to take Liz's story away when I share. The other way it probably shows up is that your team members at work could feel safe to talk about their whole lives with you too. So your children were watching this, but your
Right.
team leaders also knew you were a person that had responsibilities outside of work, and it made them safer to talk about what they were dealing with. And I'm sure that that helped them better manage both their work and life responsibilities.
So yes.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. Liz, how about you? So this idea that parenting helps us become better leaders, what comes to your mind?
For me, it's definitely about being compassionate about flexibility and understanding that people are going through different things. Um, we have so much flexibility in my team and at work. You work the hours that make sense for you. If you need to not come to a meeting because your kid is putting on a play, like, yeah, you should do that. It doesn't make any sense to skip those family things. And I think that helps the team, stay more motivated and enjoy their work more, because it's not this grueling thing that's making them do arbitrary things that don't work out for them. It is a flexible job that can work around the schedule and things that matter to them.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if you're seeing what I'm seeing, Liz. Again, this back and forth. You're supporting them around their life responsibilities. And then there's that unexpected thing that has a little bit bigger demand at work that you couldn't predict was going to require so much time. And what I've seen is because I've been flexible in one dimension, that my team will step up when that happens too. And so there is this kind of back and forth. I flex for them, they flex for me. Together, we're able to really get work done in a way that is excellent at work and supporting our lives outside of work. Are you seeing that, Liz?
Yeah, I think actually probably with science in general, that might happen regardless, even if it's not the best work environment, because there's a natural like ebb and flow where sometimes you just need a lot. But it does seem like when those things come up and people are more joyful about it. It's not like, oh God, I have to go through this. Yeah, there's probably much more willingness to go with that ebb and flow. That's true.
Yeah. Um, Liz, great point about the ebb and flow of work, because what I heard you say is we use a glass of water as an analogy of kind of your capacity for work. And if your glass of water is constantly filled to the very top and along comes that extra work, it's back to that concept you talked about burnout, right? Because you're like always at full capacity and then along comes the bigger thing. Instead, what we're trying to teach people who want to live an integrated life is leave a little wiggle room at the top of your glass. Your whole organization and team will do better if you leave a little wiggle room at the top of your glass, because then inevitably, when that what we call episodic overwork happens, you have the capacity to handle it and the goodwill to handle it. So excellent point about the ebb and flow of work. You're definitely right on track with what we've been seeing. All right, you've been listening into some amazing stories. You've been hearing why hybrid work is here to stay. Even in an industry like science and law, change has happened. We're not going backwards, we're going forwards. And hopefully, what you also heard is how your commitment to live a whole life helps you become a better leader. Liz, looking back, looking forward, when you think about some advice you might have for young parents today, what's something you'd like to encourage them to think about?
So when I think about the future for my career or for my life in general, I want to be able to look back and think, I don't regret having done things that way, or God, why did I do that? I missed out on things that I shouldn't have missed out on. So I feel like making sure you're thinking about what will actually matter to you later on. Are you doing a job that you care about and that makes you feel fulfilled? Are you making sure that you're having time for your family? Your family's not going to remember, how amazing you did at work. They're going to remember the time that you spent together. So making sure that you're saving a reasonable amount of time for that so that you don't feel like you've missed out and they don't feel like they've missed out on you also.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that probably behind the story of Liz's example is incredible conversations you can have at home, so that if you're in a two-parent household, you're really on the same page of thinking outside the box around how to do things, so you can both meet your work and family goals. Wonderful. Thank you for that great advice, Liz. Cindy, thank you for doing what you're doing, for helping change the field of law, for creating an organization that's really doing important work. When you think backwards or forwards, what advice do you have for young men and women today?
So I think I would say similar to what Liz said, that it's important to be doing work that fills you up, that you're passionate about, and that makes you happy. Because I think if you're doing that, you as a parent, when you're home, are going to feel better, and be able to be a better parent. But the opposite is true too. I think where you're working, not just what you're doing, but the how you're doing it, how much you're working, and who you're working with, if that all is, sort of in balance, and you're not working too much, and you feel respected there at work, well, then that's going to also make you a better parent. So it really goes both ways. And particularly for, the last thing I would say is you need to ask for what you need. You really need to advocate for yourself. And it can be scary, I know. But especially today, I think more than ever, if you ask and really explain why you need what you're asking for, that people hopefully are really going to try and make it work.
Yeah, yeah, and there's an old saying: if if you don't ask, you won't get an answer, right? So you have to ask the question. So wonderful. Thank you both again for the wonderful role modeling you're doing around how we can really continue to do work and family differently. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Want more ideas and support? Look for lots of free resources on our website, or continue today's conversation on our Facebook group, the ThirdPath Collective, or follow us on social media. As you can see, our nonprofit has been successfully growing an inspiring community of role models and change agents. Help us expand our reach and support these free resources by making a donation today through our website.